Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandi Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I am your host, Brandi Starr, and we have another amazing episode for you today. I am joined by Rosalyn Santa Elena. Rosalyn has over 20 years of experience leading go-to-market and revenue operations at several enterprise companies and high-growth startups. As the founder and Chief Revenue Operations Officer of the RevOps Collective, Rosalyn is on a mission to elevate, empower, and enable revenue operations to be the strategic differentiator of every organization to optimize the end-to-end customer journey and the power of the revenue engine. Rosalyn is also an advisor for several high-growth startups, an active leader in multiple communities, a RevOps instructor, a keynote speaker, and the host of the Revenue Engine podcast. Rosalyn, welcome to Revenue Rehab. Your session begins now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Brandi. Wow, what an introduction, too.
Yes, I was going to say, I feel like I have RevOps royalty on the couch today. I am so excited to get a chance to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I like to break the ice with a little woo-saw moment that I call buzzword banishment. So tell me, what industry buzzword would you like to get rid of forever?
Oh, boy. I have probably a list of them, and I'm sure a lot of them have probably already been featured. I'm sure other folks on your show have probably mentioned these. But lately, one thing that I think I hear too often that I'm a little tired of is just this concept of doing more with less.
Oh yes, it is a hot topic. And we've seen so many reductions in staffing lately that I do feel like a lot of people are definitely feeling the pressure to get more accomplished with less people and less budget. So why don't you like that one?
Yeah, I just think that, just when you hear do more with less, it's like, okay, we're asking you to now not give you enough resources, give you insufficient resources, but go and achieve these type of outcomes. And so what I've been trying to get folks to say is doing better with less, just to give it a bit of a different tone. And because I think it is about optimization, it's about being more efficient, and then also doing more of the things that are actually driving the outcomes that you want. Right. And then I think it's the same messaging. It's just a little bit of a change of the wording to give it a little bit different perspective.
Okay, I can support that. I'm going to try and change my use of the phrase to say do better with less, because you are right. It is about, it's not about just, cranking out more of something. It is about the optimization. Where do you focus your efforts? So greater results with less as opposed to just doing more.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, now that we have gotten that off our chest, tell me, what brings you to Revenue Rehab today?
Yeah. So being a champion and sort of evangelist and my passion for revenue operations, I really want to talk about why CMOs and marketing really need to invest in revenue operations.
Awesome. And I've got lots of thoughts around that. The ops side of things is where my passion lives. But before we dive right in, I believe in setting intentions. It gives us focus, it gives us purpose, and most important, it tells our audience what they should expect from our discussion today. So tell me, what are your best hopes for our talk today?
Yeah, so I'm really hoping that, folks will really come away from the conversation with really having a better understanding of, I think, what revenue operations is versus what it isn't. but also how revenue operations, when leveraged properly, can really help not just the overall revenue engine or the overall customer lifecycle, but really enable marketing specifically and really help marketing to achieve its goals and also contribute to the overall revenue process.
Awesome. And you hit on where I want to start, which is what is it and what isn't it? I know there are, lots of discussions around marketing operations. Is this revenue operations is really just sales operations? Revenue operations is a finance function. There's all these different thoughts around what RevOps is. So I'd love hear your definition and summary of what it is and then also what it isn't.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of, and I think some of the confusion, of course, is because many organizations, I think, have rebranded their sales ops to be RevOps. And I think that's not in the spirit of what revenue operations really should be. When I think about revenue operations, I really think about it as the infrastructure to support your entire process end to end that supports driving and retaining revenue, right? If you think about from top of funnel, from interest to prospect to actually closing a deal, someone becoming a customer, and especially in SaaS, as we know, once they sign on that dotted line, that's just the beginning of the journey, right? And so that customer experience, the customer success, services implementation, all the way through renewal and expansion, to me is that entire end-to-end revenue process. And so RevOps, where revenue operations comes in, is really supporting that journey from, people, process, tech that we always talk about, but also data and insights, as well as enablement and strategy to really support that customer lifecycle, but also the ability to support revenue and all of the teams that support revenue.
Yeah, and I agree. I do think that there has been this rebranding of sales in general to be deemed revenue. Like a lot of times the CRO title really is just head of sales and not head of the full revenue function. RevOps is sales ops rebranded. Why do you think it's like it's almost a little bit of a battle, like because of our book, which I know you and I have discussed.
I have it right here.
We have seen like this debate, and the underlying debate that people have is not that they agree with our fundamentals or even a lot of what you talk about in terms of revenue operations, but they just disagree with like terminology, like, oh, marketing ops should be marketing ops and revenue is sales. And I'm like, sales is not revenue. Like it's a piece of it. Like that is probably, if I think about my buzzword banishment, it would be, equating sales and revenue. But like this happens. And like, it's almost like, how do we get here? Like, did sales just decide we're going to rebrand and steal the word revenue? Or what have you seen in the industry in terms of how we've gotten to this disconnect of defining sales as revenue?
Yeah. I think that, I want to say like we move towards revenue versus talking about sales or marketing or, even post sales. And because of the fact that we realize that revenue, it's a team sport, right? I talk about this all the time, and I know you understand this. It's, revenue, everyone contributes to revenue. What we do, and everyone in the go-to-market organization, and even in product and in finance, everyone is, a contributor to revenue. And I think that's why it's so important that we've kind of shifted to this revenue title versus just talking about sales. And especially going back to kind of that SaaS model, it's not about the net, that first net new customer and that acquisition and that first time sale. It's about the ongoing revenue that we can acquire initially, but also how we retain it and how we grow that revenue. And everyone takes a part in that, right? Everybody in the go-to-market organization, because marketing is not just about acquiring net new customers. It's also about so much more about the customer life cycle. And so I think everybody needs to have that hand in that, everybody's in the big boat, right? And we always talk about kind of the little boats. Everyone has their own boats. And the key is to bring everyone into the boat so that we are all, rowing towards the same goals and in the same direction efficiently, right? And really effectively.
I like that analogy of that, when we're separate, we're all, even though we're headed towards the same destination, we're all in separate boats, which
Yep.
means, some of us may be going straight, some of us may be, veering off. But if we all get in one big boat,
Mhm.
then, we get there, more effectively, we get there together with the same focus. So that's another great analogy. The other thing that I see that gets debated a lot is if you are putting all the operations functions together, where does that live within the organization? Because I do know that that is
Yeah.
one of the hesitations is, the head of marketing is like, well, I don't want to lose my operations people. If I
Yes.
put them in this other team, then, my priorities are no longer the most important. Things are going to slow down. There's this
Yep.
perception. So where do you see that the operations function should live?
Yeah, I get asked this one quite a bit, and I think this is one of the main reasons why, when revenue operations fails, right, or isn't done properly, is when you have revenue operations reporting into a head of sales, right? Because there's a natural bias towards sales, right? Kind of that middle part of the journey of the customer versus prioritizing what's happening in marketing. And so I think that's a natural concern and definitely a consideration. So when people ask me, it's like, where should RevOps report, right? And then to me, revenue operations should report to whoever owns revenue, right? And revenue, again, not in the context of revenue is just sales, because we know it's not, but really to whoever owns all of revenue. And if that's a CRO who is truly in a chief revenue officer role where he or she owns all of revenue, then the RevOps person or leader should report into that function. But in the absence of that, revenue ops should report to even the CEO, right? Or a COO or a different role, whoever is really owning revenue. And I've seen that. And I think that's why we're starting to see a shift of some RevOps reporting into the CFO. And I have my own thoughts about that. just talking about that earlier today, because there's a and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, because I think, putting RevOps reporting into the CFO, I think there's some perception and some benefit to that of, it's a independent body, it's outside of marketing, it's outside of sales. But my history has told me that I think there's a healthy friction, right, between finance and go-to-market. It's a healthy friction that I think is important. And so I think if you do sit revenue operations in finance, you start to get some of that same kind of bias that you do when you have them report into a head of sales, right?
Yeah.
And also I think that, there's definitely a perception of, having revenue operations sit in the revenue team, in that same boat, right? With your sales leaders and with your marketing team and with your, post-sales and customer success folks, and being part of that organization and being seen as really that support, that proponent, that, champion of that team, but obviously working very, very closely with finance and every other team in the organization.
Yeah, no, I am of the same mindset. Like, I do think that finance has to be a key partner. I mean, honestly, to all functions of revenue, but having revenue operations live within finance, in my opinion, does create a gap, because like the metrics piece of the operations is only one piece, and that's what finance is going to care most about is how are we tracking and reporting, how it ties into the finances, and that is an extremely important piece. But I do feel like it does miss the mark, and it does create the wrong kind of friction when the decisions are being made coming out of finance, being made by the head of finance as opposed to in collaboration with, like, that I do think is a different dynamic. But I think that gives a good foundation of what it is, where it should live. And so I really want to shift and talk about RevOps as a growth driver. And this is something that, I am always preaching to clients. Email marketing is our bread and butter, and the operational process of everything that flows through that communication journey. But I know that a lot of times that I am talking to heads of marketing, and not that they don't see the value in revenue operations, but going back to limited resources, when they think about where they are going to put their budget and their head count,
Mhm.
RevOps most often does not fall in the number one category, or in some cases, not even top three.
Mhm.
So what is the importance here? Let's just cut to the chase of why this is so important that CMOs need to pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think for operations, if you think about ops, a lot of times people think about marketing automation, right? They think about campaign ops, if you will, folks that are actually running some of those campaigns, whether they're email or events or things like that. But if you think about having operations be your eyes and ears and those deeper insights of what is actually happening in your business proactively and what's working really well. Because when we look at our marketing budgets, we want to spend our money in the places that are going to give us the best results and the best outcome. But how do you know? Right? A lot of times you're doing A/B testing, you're testing things, and then you're waiting for results, right? It's after the quarter, after the month is over, and then you're looking back and you're already 1 month into the next quarter, and then you're like, okay, I need to go pivot. I need to stop doing this. But you're already so far into a launch. And so you already have invested money. But think about having visibility real time into what's working and what's not. And somebody who is dedicated to looking at your business and how you're performing towards your marketing strategy and the goals that you're trying to achieve. And then being able to bubble up those insights to your leadership team as they come up, right? Not just like, oh, here's a report or here's a dashboard to go look at. Oh, here's the number of, net new leads that we have, some of those very high level lagging indicators, but more of the deep insights in terms of what's actually coming in the funnel. Where is it coming from? Where do we need to lean in? And where do we need to pivot, right? And especially as we're talking about doing better with less and being more efficient with our dollars and our resources, this is when you really need somebody as a business partner doing that for you, your eyes and your ears, identifying those blind spots and looking, I always talk about ops being the ones who kind of look around the corners and kind of see what's coming versus what everyone else can see that's right in front of your face.
Yeah, and I think what that lends well to is there's, been this kind of movement of dropping the ing in marketing. So being the chief market officer and really being the person within the organization who truly knows and understands the market. And I think a lot of what you're talking about that comes out of RevOps is an enabler for that.
Yeah.
Like the insights of what's happening, like being able to bubble up those things that you're seeing in, more real time is a key component of that. But when you don't have that, you don't have that person or team that is really constantly looking at those things. There is a gap there.
Mm. Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say the other thing is when you think about process, and I know you're a big process person as I am as well, and you think about that repeatability, right? And having, I think about companies that I've worked at where I have joined, and just to get an email out, out the door requires so many steps and so many cycles and so much back and forth, right? But when you have somebody focused from an operational perspective on process, then you have intake forms with all of the information you need. It's automated. It's, it's just the efficiency and just the ability to scale and the ability to just do better, right? We keep talking about doing better with less.
Yeah, and that actually is in the direction of the question that I was going to ask, because I know initially we talked a lot about the data and the insights, which I think is one flavor of revenue operations that is really important. And that process is the second, because I think the other thing, with being able to do better with less is, process that streamlines things and allows you to turn things around quicker with fewer hands having to touch it is always great for everyone. But then I think the other piece is like how we are able to react to the market and get things in market and be agile. I have talked to clients where they've had someone, whether it's an analytics team or in operations or wherever it lives, they have seen some change in the market that dictated that there needed to be a response. But to your point, that process of getting anything out there is so lengthy that, that early insight that you had turns out to be you're actually, coming into the conversation late because it takes so long to get everything, to actually get things out there. And like, to me, that's a huge missed opportunity, especially if you're in a really competitive, space, and you've got competitors that are, kind of beating you to the punch. You become the Me Too messaging as opposed to being more of that thought leader, which I know is a buzzword that several people have banished. And that all comes down to process.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I think people, people tend to kind of hear process and they think of gatekeepers and things that are going to slow you down. But when process is done right, it actually makes things move faster, right? And you're able to scale. And, as you mentioned, to be able to pivot, right? Because you're not creating everything one-off. You're not reinventing the wheel every single time when you have to do something different. Instead, you have a process that's iterative, right? You're going to improve the process and continue to refine it as your business changes. But you have a process that's going to be repeatable. And it also sets the right expectations for everyone, right? Think about internally, everyone knows what to expect. They know who's got the ball, right? There's no dropping of the ball because there's clear rules of engagement and clear roles and responsibilities. And it just drives a much better internal handoff process across all of the teams as well, where again, everybody in the same boat, right? Rowing at the same speed and being efficient about it.
Yeah, and that is another key thing when it comes to time, because in any marketing organization, there's going to be different functions involved, whether it's one person that handles each of the things or whole teams. And I have seen situations where one part of the process is able to accelerate something, but then it becomes a bottleneck. Like it gets here and it just sits and there's no prioritization. Or, we had a client where every time they put an email out, it went to design first. So like they were designing new emails every single time. And it was like, why? Like there's only so many variations, and it's something as simple as that when you don't have someone that is of an operations mindset that, one exists within the org and two is empowered to drive process across the board, then you do get those things that are happening that, the creative team is like, sure, we'll design something every time. Like that's our jam. Yeah. But nobody's going, like, that's not the best use of your time or mine. Like that is important. And it seems like the roles are starting to show up in marketing, for at least a RevOps person. But it seems like a lot of people are still late to the boat. And so I'd ask, for those people that don't have marketing ops or a RevOps person, like, what do you do? Like, how do you get some of these things moving if you're just like, yeah, process, insight, those things don't really exist here. Like, where do you start?
Yeah, I actually think that in a lot of organizations that say they don't have ops, they actually have some kind of form of ops, right? And it may not be optimized or maybe not in that sort of coming from an operational mindset, but you probably have your demand gen person doing some of this. You have your content person doing some of this, right? Maybe, and maybe even you have your head of marketing doing some of these things that really, are taking away from their time and taking away from their expertise at doing the things that they're really good at and that are really meaningful for them. And then, not having an operations person who has that operational mindset, who maybe can do things in a different way that's actually setting it up better for success. I think a lot of times you'll see that. And I think if you don't have, a dedicated operations support, maybe you just don't have the budget for it, right? But you need to get some of this rigor in place. There are things obviously that you can start to do, right? Even as a demand gen person, if you're putting together things, you're probably building some repeatable process, right? Or if you find yourself recreating the wheel, like in your design example, if you're doing that every single time, it probably tells you that, hey, there's a better way to be doing this. And I need to take a step back and think about that. Because think about the time wasted just recreating every single time. And starting in that example that you gave of starting with creative and kind of doing the design, think about all the other things that have to go into that email before it's even ready for design, right? Design is sort of the last kind of the bow, make it pretty and get it out the door, right? Make sure that it's compelling to your audience, but the content and, who's the audience and all of the things that have to go into that, those are things that could be done much earlier in the process.
And so my last question, because you talked about headcount, and if I'm a head of marketing, I hear everything that you're saying. I agree. And I feel like I'm at the place where I need a person or a team. How do we build that case? Like, how do we make that clear connection to revenue and growth and why that this is an important expense for the business? Like, how do I justify to my CFO or my CEO that I need to invest in this? What's the business case there?
Yeah. I think it's, I think about revenue operations when people ask me, like, why do I need to invest? How do I build up a case? What's the ROI? And I always think about it like a selling cycle almost, right? You have to think about the business challenges that you're facing and think about the pain, right? What are the pain points? Because chances are, if you ask any leader in marketing, they'll probably, if you ask them, like, what things keep you up at night? What are the things that you're not getting that you wish you had to be able to better, to run your business better? And they'll probably have a list of at least 5, 6 things, maybe a dozen things that they're like, oh, I wish I had better, better visibility into attribution, or better visibility into this, or I wish I had these insights sooner, or I wish I knew what was actually working. And so I think when you think about all the things that you're not getting, or where there's very painful areas that are causing a slowdown in your ability to execute, those are some of the things that can go into sort of your use case for why you need operations, right? And especially in this market, I think in a downturn market, but also in a growth market, when things are growing, in either case, having that strong operational infrastructure is going to support you. I mean, even if you're in a big growth market and you're taking off, we know that you can get there faster, right? If you have that operational rigor. And in a down market, similarly, you need to have that operational excellence in order to help you do better with less. So from a marketing perspective, I think if you think about what are the insights, what are the things that I want to have to be able to really drive more revenue faster, and that can easily build a case of probably a dozen things of why you need it.
Awesome. Well, talking about our challenges is just the first step, and nothing changes if nothing changes. So in traditional therapy, the therapist will give the client some homework, but here at Revenue Rehab, we like to flip that on its head and ask you to give us some homework. So I'd love for you to give us our one action item. If we are a CMO that recognizes that we need to invest more in operations, what's our first step? What's the one thing that you would recommend that we do in order to move the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, I think it maybe goes back to, what we were just talking about thinking about that nice to have, right? Think about what are the things that the top 2 or 3 things that would really help accelerate my business and help me achieve and exceed my goals the fastest. Because I think if you think about those couple of things, a lot of times it's going to not point to necessarily more money or more campaigns or more, anything other than if I had the right operational structure to support my business, I can be much more effective and much more efficient.
I like that, because that's a good action item for even those that have operations, people or teams in place, to just be able to identify right now, what are the 2 to 3 accelerators, like, being able to do better with less. What are those 2 to 3 things that I could do that would allow me to do so and to really accelerate growth and efficiency? So I really like that as an action item. So we've all got our marching orders now. Well, I have enjoyed our discussion, but that's our time for today. But before we go, how can our audience connect with you? I know you've got a community and a podcast, so tell us about all of the things.
Yeah. So the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm always there. Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not connected. Check out the RevOps Collective. Our website is up, and in true scrappy startup mode, I built my own website. So check it out. Definitely, it's iterative and it's evolving. Lots to do there still, but check it out. And definitely look into the community. We'll be launching the community next month. And so it's really going to be a RevOps community for RevOps by RevOps. So for folks who are interested in learning more about revenue operations or up-leveling themselves as RevOps professionals, it's a great place to be able to learn and grow. And of course, check out the Revenue Engine podcast and check out Brandi's episode.
Yes,
you were a guest. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it has been a while. And we'll make sure to put the link to the community and to the podcast and my episode on the podcast into the show notes. So wherever you are listening to this episode, just check the show notes and all of those links will be there. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I have enjoyed, I was going to say, as always, I love talking to you and learning from you. So I'm glad that my audience is having the opportunity to do so as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Brandi. And as always a great conversation with you. Thank you.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I have enjoyed my conversation with Rosalyn. I can't believe we're at the end. See you next time.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandi Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.